Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and had a subscriber ask a question, and he asked me Sage Northcutt, Natty or not. And I don't normally do Natty or not. I usually do how to spot a fake Natty, and I need to do how to spot a fake Natty every elite athlete on earth. The fact that they're an elite athlete is absolute evidence in my mind that they're on drugs. Pretty straightforward. So that's also the cliff notes for this video, for those who don't want to watch the whole thing. But I find it disconcerting that subscribers, multiple people have asked me about him again lately, and it's misconcerning to me. Or is the word disconcerting? Who knows? I just took a nap. I just woke up. And that subscribers would ask me that, given how much information I've discussed about drug testing and everything. So let me put on my +5 cap of weaponsmithing, polish some brass, and knock this question out. Now, I think it's interesting that I got asked about a local boy because he's from Katy and I live up near Tomball, and I'm actually about an hour away from where Sage goes to school currently. Also ironic, I got asked about him because he goes to TAMU, the home of the Fighting Texas Aggies, which I had told people previously a couple years back. I admitted to you guys I used to manufacture anabolics and other drugs that I used to actually sell to some of the Texas A&M football team, and I used to help them pass their drug tests. They used to pay me to help them pass their drug tests, students at that university, so it's a little ironic I'm being asked about a student in Texas A&M. But that being said, let's think about this for a minute. Everyone always asks this of, do you think this athlete or that athlete could be natural or on drugs? And it's like, guys, how naive do you have to be to still buy into the dog and pony show of drug testing in sports when athlete after athlete has told you that everyone's on? Nate Diaz told you guys everyone's on in the UFC. Lance Armstrong talked about how he danced through drug testing for over a decade successfully and was the best in the world at what he did. Genetically gifted and went on drugs. That's unbeatable. Then he beat drug testing for over a decade with ease, not a problem. None at all. And he told you guys pretty much everyone's on. It doesn't matter what the sport is, everyone's on. And what people need to understand, they don't understand competitive sports. You guys don't understand that to serious athletes, winning isn't the only thing. Winning is, well, it is the only thing. It's the expression that I've heard athletes say, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. Many championship athletes have been asked in surveys, the majority of really well-placing athletes, when they're asked in psychological surveys, if they could be number one in their sport, meaning win a Super Bowl, win a gold medal, whatever, would they be willing to die 2 years later if that ensured that they won? The answer is almost universally yes. Think about that for a minute. An athlete will do anything to win, a true champion, and that's why a lot of people don't understand the mindset of a champion. There's a psychological profile that is a genetic profile, involves insane work ethic and doing whatever it takes to win, is part of the genetic makeup of a top athlete. It's not just having the physical attributes, because there are plenty of people with the physical gifts but no work ethic. You combine that with the work ethic, which does seem to be genetic. How hard you're willing to work versus how lazy you are seems to be a genetic trait. It is one of the traits of a champion. They can't change that. They're born with that mentality. Basically, people are born to be champions in their endeavor. They have the genetics for it. They have the drive for it. So you take that into consideration. Hell, we even had examples of, remember the Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding situation, in which, again, in non-aggressive, non-physical Olympic sport, someone tried to take out their gold medal competitor who they knew would win by paying someone to break their legs. All right, that's how serious sports are to people. So this idea that any sort of champion won't do anything, literally anything to win, up to including cheat and break the rules, particularly when they know everyone else is already doing it, is insane. When you have had guys like Lance Armstrong tell you how easy it is if you're smart to beat drug testing, that they can get away with it, and most people do. When you had the head of Balco Labs do an 1.5 hour long interview after he served prison time for his operation for supplying thousands, literally thousands of athletes out of his lab, And that was part of how he got a plea bargain. He had to turn over his customer list to the feds so that he got his prison sentence reduced. But yeah, he said his was only one of a dozen labs out there, and he had over 5,000 customers. There's a dozen labs doing the same thing. That means that he knows of, there's a dozen other labs still operating out there with at least 5,000 customers. Dozen labs times 5,000 is 60,000 athletes being supplied with undetectable steroids, and these labs all stay ahead of the drug testing. They try to crank out a new drug every 6 months so that if the old one gets detectable, they've got a new one ready to replace it. That's business. That is the nature of modern sports. And the thing is, when I say that people can't win without them, they can't. You're already competing against people who are genetically gifted in your endeavors. But what all have these drugs been proven to do? People tend to think of these things, oh, they're just for bodybuilders or whatever. They don't help with skills. They don't help with endurance. Really? Lance Armstrong didn't prove to you they help with endurance? All the studies on them proving that they help with endurance doesn't prove to you that they help with endurance? Think about it. Many of these anabolic substances increase cardiovascular capacity, endurance, and work capacity. Those things can be injected. If you need to be good at an extreme endurance in sport, you're going to increase your endurance with a substance. And you can dance through drug testing like Lance Armstrong did. People talk about skills and everything. Well, let me ask you a question. Since we know these substances help with recovery, they let you practice your skills longer, harder, and recover from it faster and do it more often. They increase work capacity, endurance, and recovery. How do you develop a skill? How do you get better at a skill? By practicing it. And if it has a physical base to it and it requires endurance, just throwing a ball or kicking a ball. All right, that has an endurance component. It has an endurance component or a strength component in there. You need more work capacity and endurance and recovery to be able to do it for hours and hours and hours a day without getting sore, without getting tired, and to keep doing it. All right, it does help develop skills. What about needing calmness? Well, these things just help with recovery, speed, power, endurance, but some things require focus and calmness. Really, there aren't substances that do that also. I was a competitive shooter in my teens. You don't think that we used drugs? You've never heard of beta blockers? There are drugs that can reduce your body's adrenaline output. They can block adrenaline. If you can block adrenaline, you can stay calmer. You can lower your heart rate. If you can lower your heart rate and lower your breathing, can you fire a bullet, throw a dart, or fire an arrow more accurately and more precisely? You don't think drugs can even be used in those sports? So in every single performance element, there are substances out there that can help with it. And all these substances improve work capacity, endurance, speed up recovery, and even help with injury prevention many times. In what world does anyone live in to where when we know you can dance through the drug testing, if you've got the money, the connections, and the knowledge, it can easily be done? And what world does anyone live in to where there isn't even an option for a top athlete to be clean? What world do we live in where it's even an option? Because if everyone you're competing against is gifted and trains hard, oh, and by the way, many of these substances increase motivation and work ethic also. How can you possibly compete against someone else who is just as gifted as you are, because everyone top in any sport is gifted at it? How do you compete against someone who is as gifted as you are if they can take a substance that increases motivation and work ethic, increases endurance, increases work capacity, increases recovery, reduces injury rates, improves focus, lowers heart rate if needed, substances that improve concentration? These are all PEDs. A lot of those things you don't realize. A lot of the things on these banned lists are there because they can increase focus, they can lower heart rate. How do you compete with someone else who does that when they can inject their motivation and their recovery in a bottle? They can outwork you. They can outpractice you. If they're just as gifted as you are, they will destroy you. And they can do it because the drug testing can't work. It's never worked and it never will work. Because there's too much money and too much motivation and drive involved in sports for anyone to not find ways around the drug testing like they have done since it was implemented. So when people ask a question of, do you think this athlete or that athlete is Natty, who looks impressive and performs impressively compared to most people he's competing with, do you really need to ask that? The question is beyond absurd. You know what would be absurd? What would be absurd is that anyone with common sense and reason who looks at any of the history of sports and drug testing or what drugs are actually capable of doing today, that anyone thinks that in a truly competitive environment where people are competing for international prestige or millions of dollars, that there is any possibility that anyone on that field that they're rooting for who's doing well isn't on drugs. It's absurd to even think that it's possible. And that's not a knock at sports. That's not a knock at any individual athlete. That's just sheer ignorance and naivety to actually think that it's possible. And you know, that's what's sold to the public. It's sold to the public because there's so much money in sports, they want this pristine image, and they don't want that image to be tainted by the use of drugs that are cheating. And they're scared, and this is what politicians have said, this is to protect the children. The reason this needs to be made a big deal and the media needs to spin it this way is to protect the children. Because what would happen if all the children and teenagers out there who look up to all of these athletes found out that all of their heroes and all of their champions are using various drugs that might be illegal and are definitely cheating? What would these children do? They would then be shown that breaking the law or being a cheater is the way to be successful and become a hero. And that is not the ethic that they want to send to young children in their formative years, in their impressionable years, who they need to be functional members of society later. The last thing they want to do is tell all those children the way to win and get to the top is to lie and cheat. That's how you do it. That's the only way to get there. They don't want to tell them that. And they sure don't want to tell them that might include even breaking the law. Not how you make a functional society. So that's what this is about, is protecting the children. You know, the only way you make that go away, just remove the rules on it so that they're no longer cheaters. Of course, that's just my opinion on it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.